A terrace of cobblestone walkways. Stairs leading seemingly to nowhere. Ghostly pillars of soft blue light. A paradox, suspended in a limitless sea of ethereal mist, dimly lit from the warm glow of a single street lamp. This is the end of time. Once we arrive here after Luca repairs Robo in the destroyed future, it serves as our home base for the rest of the game. And whether you're coming back to bring a new character to Spekkio, or just passing through on your way to another time period, you can't help but appreciate the uniqueness of the place. You won't find anything quite like the end of time anywhere else in the game. The utter loneliness of it permeates, from the noir-style walks and fences, to the absolute void of nothingness surrounding it. Even Gaspar makes mention of how bleak it is when describing how one of your party members must stay there. Before we get into the finer details of the end of time, let's first talk about how we end up there in the first place. Having thrown the switch for Protodome's security door and defeated the R-Series at the factory, we return Robo's destroyed body to Luca for repairs. Once he's back to full strength, he decides to join us. This marks the first time we've tried to enter a gate with more than 3 people, and something seems immediately off when we see the gate struggle to close and throw arcs of lightning here and there. When we breach the other side of the gate, we arrive somewhere very different from the green plains and blue skies of 1000 AD. The only sound which reverberates throughout the sparsely lit terrace in somber musical tones is the repetitive snoring of a single man residing within. He's clad all in brown, hunched forward on his cane, which somehow supports him well enough to sleep while standing. With nothing else to interact with, Chrono and the gang interrupt his slumber. Okay, so at this point, we get to know Gaspar a bit, and he very vaguely explains where you are. First of all, it has to be said, Gaspar is cool as hell. I mean, as far as internal guides in video games go, Gaspar gives very common sense hints throughout the game on where you should go next, without straight out saying, hey, do this thing exactly, which I always liked. Regardless of that, he's just cool in general. His design, his manner of speak, the way he can just immediately fall asleep whenever he feels like it, I wish I could do that. And despite his role in helping you defeat Lavos, he also is just genuinely invested in the well-being of your party members. Anyway, as I said, he very vaguely describes the end of time for us upon our first meeting. We can glean from it that the end of time obviously exists outside of the regular flow of time. Keep in mind that I'm going off of the SNES version of his speech for this video, which may differ in translation from other versions. For instance, a deeply discussed line in Gaspar's talk here about far too many people just popping up here might not even exist, but it's super interesting to think about. From a gameplay intertwined with story perspective, his explanation of why the gate in Protodome brought us here at all is genius. From a practical standpoint, the developers never wanted us to have a party of more than 3 people at a time, and the fact that any more than 3 beings entering a time portal disrupts the stability of the gate was just such a good way to impose that limit. So many games would just not address something like that. Sure, there might be story reasons in a game for why you can only take a certain number of characters on a certain mission or something, but having a constant restriction in the form of a story-driven game mechanic is so smart, and you don't find yourself upset by it at all. It just is how it is. Holy crap, sorry, I'm rambling. Starting to sound like Gaspar myself. Anyway, moving on, he tells us that the pillars of light act as gates to certain time periods just like the ones we've used before. As we talked about in our gates video, I feel as though the pillars just teleport you upwards into actual gates that must be floating somewhere in the ether above them, but that's speculation. He also warns to steer clear of the gate which rests in the bucket in the corner, as it leads directly to the day of Lavos. Imagine, just for a second, the absurdity of that. A time portal, inside a bucket, at the end of time, that leads to the apocalypse. Like most things in Chrono Trigger, the more you think about it, the more absurd it appears, and yet it's so well integrated that we don't even give its presence a second thought for most of our trips here. Yet there is something terrifying about it just sitting there, proving that even outside the flow of time, Lavos' influence exists, beckoning you, daring you. When we finally gain control of our party once more and decide on who to leave behind, we can explore a bit more. As soon as we get a few steps away, Gaspar stops us and says to check out what's behind the door behind him. This is when we meet the only other sentient being at the end of time, Spekkio, the Master of War. He talks a lot of shit about us, by the way. He's arrogant and full of himself, and he's pretty powerful no matter what level you are, as he scales to match your strength at any given moment. He gifts your party with the ability to use magic, and gives you the opportunity to test it out in a match with him. Whether you decline or choose to fight him is up to you, but either way, when you leave, Gaspar mentions that many people long ago enjoyed the use of such powers you now hold, and to use them cautiously. Alright, now on to the meat of this video. What the hell exactly is the End of Time? Jumping ahead a bit to Magus's flashback on the Northern Cape, we see the three gurus and Janus all sucked into black portals during the original Ocean Palace disaster. The only person who recognizes what is happening is the Guru of Time, declaring it to be a time gate. We then witness all of them appearing in the various times we meet them throughout the game, finally landing on Gaspar, who floats into a void with no form or structures present. He immediately seems to understand it to be the End of Time. Now that's super interesting by itself. Being the Guru of Time, I imagine that the End of Time probably existed within his notes and studies as a speculative musing when he was in Zeal. And perhaps the End of Time isn't even at the end, but rather just a plane existing elsewhere, independent of the time stream. Not a beginning or an end, but rather adjacent to time itself. Who knows? But Gaspar, again, seemed to have prior knowledge of such a place. Regardless of that, another ancient topic revolving around his arrival there is, where did all this stuff come from? When he appears, there is literally nothing but the swirling void around him. No terrace, no street lamp, no pillars. No Spekkio either, apparently. It's fairly agreed upon that Gaspar, knowing magic, created the things we see when we arrive at the End of Time, which is all well and good, but are we to believe he did so in the exact spot he arrived? I don't think so, actually. Gaspar's magic is likely pretty strong, but he can't create gates. As far as we know, they are anchored to the spot they exist, even at the End of Time. It makes me wonder about just how long Gaspar had to wade through the mist until he came upon the Lavos Gate. Curiosity, or rather a desire to escape, may have prompted him to try going through it, only to peace out pretty fast once he realized where it took him, opting to return to the End of Time and create the small space with his magic to stay near it. The other mystery is when exactly Spekkio arrived there. Is he one of the folks that just keep popping up here, or did he always reside at the End of Time? He seems to have knowledge of Zeal, but that could be due to the ability to view events throughout history from the End of Time, as Gaspar alludes to, or maybe he was in Zeal and we just didn't notice on our trip through there. His final form is obviously a new, and there were a ton of them in the Ancient Kingdom. Then again, considering his shape and form are tied to the party, at that point he would have looked like an Omnicron, maybe? In which case, he could have been the one in the Ocean Palace that summons the Lashers and stuff. That one does cheese it before the fight starts and we never get to defeat it. Maybe that was indeed Spekkio, and he ended up at the End of Time during the Ocean Palace disaster just like Gaspar. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention what seems to be at least a sister location to the End of Time in Chrono. The Bend of Time rests nestled in between a ring of islands at the center of El Nido. First, let's talk about how aesthetically cool that is. A dimensional rift anchored to the middle of the ocean. Chrono did a lot of cool stuff like this. Think of how weird it is that the dimensional vortex that leads to Sprig's world is located innocuously in the Hydra Marshes, or how mundane and dormant the pedestals for creating the Chrono are at the falls. Anyway, I'm getting off topic again. The Bend of Time seems aesthetically similar to the End of Time in that there is a street lamp, cobblestone, and a single door. The Pillars of Light also appear here, yet instead of taking you to different time periods, they summon monsters from various planes of existence to fight you. The door, rather than leading to Spekkio, takes you to a boss battle with some familiar enemies, who we'll discuss in a separate video. The caretaker of this place is definitely weirder than Gaspar. I'm not sure if this was intended to be the abandoned End of Time after the canon ending of CT or a totally different place, but if it is different, why is the design similar? Obviously, you could say, Tony, it was just fan service and nostalgia bait, like a lot of things in Chrono were. But I like to find some sort of narrative reason for things this significant. I could certainly be wrong, but I feel if they thought it was important to include, it has to be for more than this is for the callback. it makes me wonder if perhaps this is a different floating area within the same space where Gaspar resided. The pillars seem to be endemic to the end of time, so it's not inconceivable to think that there will be varying kinds which do different things from time travel. I don't know, but I felt the need to include the bend in this video as, narratively or not, these two locations quite clearly have some kind of connection. Either way, the end of time is such a neat place, I had to make a video on it. The idea of dimensions existing outside of the normal flow of time is so fascinating that it practically begs for fan speculation. As far as Gaspar goes, he's easily my favorite of the Gurus of Zeal, and the end of time is only one facet of his story. I'll probably give he and the other gurus more screen time and a character spotlight at some point, but for now, we'll just let him have a well-deserved nap. Thanks you guys for watching, and I'll catch you next time for another Chrono video. Peace!